Thank you very much. Look, I always think it's very crude to lecture people about where they're from. You know what's happening in Egypt, and you know what's happening with the Coptic community in Egypt. And any analysis that I would provide of that will come off soulless because, frankly, I'm not Egyptian, and I'm not an Egyptian Christian. And while I feel great sympathy for this community, I'm not experiencing it directly as, at the very least, your families, if not you are. So that's not what I want to talk about. I want to talk to you as fellow Americans, okay? And I'm going to make this very, very brief. And I'm going to repeat a message that I try to make every year, and that based on the size of this group, which is quite impressive, I think is starting to resonate, but it needs to resonate more. And the message is very simple. Unfortunately, we only talk about the Coptic Christian community as Americans when something goes wrong, when there's an attack like the ones we've seen recently in Minya, Palm Sunday, in December. I mean, really, they're escalating in terms of the pace. We only talk about these things as Americans when things go wrong, and I don't need to tell the folks in this room that by that point, it's too late. It's too late. It's deeply troubling to me that an issue that should be a bipartisan issue in this country, that I would say if you asked Americans, is a bipartisan issue in this country, namely the fate of Christians in the Middle East, the fate of a religious minority in Egypt, a country to which we give a great deal of military and historically economic aid, that is a bipartisan issue. And I'm sorry to say that despite the fact, I should say that it's an issue with bipartisan resonance, it is not at present one that is discussed on both sides of the aisle. Why is that? And cards on the table here. I am a registered Republican. I am a conservative, okay? The reason why I think this is not a bipartisan issue, unfortunately, is because there's understandable discomfort with some of the positions on the left wing of the aisle in this country as it pertains to Islamists and the sort of things that religious minorities fear most in the Middle East. I understand that, and maybe that's a part of the reason why I come out the way I do on the political aisle. But my job here in Washington all day, every day, is to talk about Egypt, to talk about U.S. policy towards Egypt, talk about what's happening on Egypt. I attend in a given week, God knows how many meetings, hold how many phone calls on what's happening in Egypt. And you want to know kind of the craziest thing? Actually, nothing's happening in Egypt, right? I mean, the political situation has been basically the same for the last 4 years. Not good, but somehow we have all these phone calls and these meetings because there's a lot of interest in Egypt. And I have to tell you, I am never at a meeting, whether it's on the Hill, whether it's with the administration, whether it's at a think tank, at which the Coptic community is represented in some way, shape, or form. The community is not well organized as it should be in Washington. It is not a part of the conversation that it needs to be, and I suspect it's not a part of that conversation because for one reason or another, and I'm simply telling you what I observe as someone who works on this every day, I can't tell you really why this is because at the end of the day, this is you, this is not me, right? Let's be honest about that. The outreach isn't there. The presence isn't there. And so when do we talk about the Coptic Christian community? I'm sorry to say, I get phone calls from media after a terrorist attack. And that's it. Those are the only times we talk about that. I am telling you something that you know, but I'm trying to raise that as a problem that can be resolved. How do you resolve it? It's not we, right? It's you. How do you resolve it? Again, as a sympathetic observer of U.S. policy discussions towards Egypt and Washington, I would recommend a couple of things. First, more bipartisan outreach, okay? I looked at actually the agenda of this conference, and I have to give you credit. It is more bipartisan than it's been in the past. It's a much more diverse panel than it's been in the past. We need more progress on that, okay? That's the first thing. The second thing is there needs to be an attempt, in my view, to build a next generation leadership that is engaged in Washington, okay? That simply doesn't exist. I mean, I know the young people who work in many different ethnic, religious, etc. communities representing different types of broad interest sets here in Washington. And I work on Egypt, and I have to tell you, I don't know a single Copt of my generation who is doing that work every day. I don't know the person who, when I have a question, I can call whose focus is only that. I mean, I know obviously many Egyptian Christians, many, and I know people that are very well versed in this, right? But their job is not to be, the Egyptian Christian expert necessarily, and that is a problem. I'm taking it in this direction because I'm talking to you not strictly as Egyptians, but frankly as fellow Americans. Okay, I grew up in New York City, where there's, as you know, a very large Egyptian community. At my wedding, I had a whole table of Egyptian Christians. My father's a CPA. He has many clients from Brooklyn who, referred each other to him. This is a community that I've known my whole life. It's one that I care about. It's one that I'm very sad to talk about only in the context of when things go wrong. And I'm urging you to think through as a community how to make it so that we're not only talking about it when it's too late, it's a constant part of the U.S. conversation about Egypt because it's the one aspect of an American human rights agenda in Egypt where you will find broad bipartisan support because that's there in the heart of Americans. Americans see this country as a country not just of liberty, but as a country of religious liberty, okay? So the soil is fertile. You have to plant that seed. All right, let's talk about this more in the Q&A. Thank you very much.